Kelima was a lively town, filled with traders calling out their wares, children laughing in the streets, and the scent of freshly baked bread drifting from market stalls. But for 10-year-old Zelina, life had suddenly turned into a nightmare. Her parents, whom she loved dearly, had died in a tragic accident. One moment, they had been a happy family, and the next, she was an orphan, thrown into an uncertain future. With no close relatives nearby, she was sent to live with her aunt, Madame Nseku, and her cousin, Adan. At first, Madame Nseku put on a kind face, welcoming Zelina into her home with forced warmth. Adan, too, pretended to be friendly, but her eyes held a coldness that made Zelina uneasy. Though grieving, she clung to hope, believing she had found a new family that would care for her. However, it did not take long for the truth to surface. The kindness was an illusion, a mask that quickly slipped away. Madame Nseku saw Zelina not as a niece to be loved, but as an extra mouth to feed, a burden. The warm meals and comforting words soon disappeared, replaced by harsh commands and cold indifference. Adan, who had everything she could ever want, looked down on Zelina with disdain. She mocked her worn clothes, her sadness, and her helplessness. Madame Nseku's house, which had seemed like a new beginning, became a prison. Zelina was too young to understand why her own family treated her so cruelly. But even as loneliness wrapped around her like a thick fog, she promised herself one thing: she would not break. She would endure no matter what. Life in Madame Nseku's house quickly turned into a nightmare for Zelina. At first, she had hoped that with time, her aunt and cousin would accept her, but she soon realized that she was not a part of the family. She was nothing more than a servant. Each morning, before the sun even rose, Madame Nseku would wake Zelina with a sharp voice. "Get up! There is work to do!" she would snap. While Adan lay in her soft, warm bed, Zelina was forced to sweep the floors, wash the dishes, and scrub the entire house. The work never ended. She cleaned, cooked, fetched water, and ran errands all day. If anything was not done perfectly, Madame Nseku would scold her harshly, or even slap her. Zelina was not allowed to eat proper meals. While Adan enjoyed delicious food, juicy meat, fresh fruits, and warm, fluffy bread, Zelina got nothing but leftover scraps. Sometimes, if Madame Nseku was in an especially bad mood, she would not give Zelina any food at all. The poor girl often went to bed with an empty stomach, listening to the sound of Adan laughing and enjoying herself in the next room. Clothes were another way Madame Nseku showed her cruelty. Adan always wore the finest dresses, shiny shoes, and expensive jewelry. Whenever Madame Nseku went shopping, she bought new outfits for Adan, but never for Zelina. The only clothes Zelina had were the old torn ones that Adan no longer wanted. In school, other children would stare at her worn-out dress and whisper behind her back. Some even laughed at her, making fun of how she looked. Even though Zelina was a bright girl who loved learning, Madame Nseku refused to let her study properly. While Adan attended the best school in Kelima and had private tutors to help her, Zelina had to struggle on her own. Madame Nseku made her miss school often, forcing her to stay home and do house chores instead. "Why waste money on you?" she sneered. "You will never amount to anything." The emotional abuse hurt just as much as the physical punishment. Madame Nseku constantly reminded Zelina that she was unwanted, a burden, an orphan who had nowhere else to go. Adan, following her mother's example, treated Zelina like a nobody. She would order her around, mock her, and laugh when Madame Nseku scolded her. But despite the pain, Zelina never gave up hope. Deep in her heart, she believed that life would not always be this way. She dreamed of a future where she would be free, where she would prove that she was worth something. Late at night, after a long day of suffering, Zelina would stare at the moon through the tiny window in her room, a small dark space at the back of the house. She whispered a silent promise to herself. One day, things will change. One day I will be strong. And so, despite everything, she endured. The sun shone brightly over Kelima as the school prepared for its grand annual event. Students wore their best clothes, parents arrived with proud smiles, and the air was filled with excitement. But for Zelina, this was just another day of suffering, another day where she would be reminded that she did not belong. Zelina had been looking forward to the event, even though she knew she had nothing fancy to wear. She had carefully washed and ironed her only dress, an old faded one that had once belonged to Adan. The fabric was thin, the color had faded, and the edges were frayed, but it was all she had. As she walked into the school compound, heads turned, whispers spread, and then came the laughter. Adan stood in the middle of a group of well-dressed girls, her eyes shining with mischief. She smirked as she pointed at Zelina. "Look at her," she said loudly. "She looks like a beggar. Did she pick that dress from the trash?" The other girls burst into laughter. "Maybe that's why she always smells like soap water. She washes people's clothes all day," one of them added, giggling. Zelina's face burned with shame. She wanted to disappear, to run away and never come back. But she stood still, holding back tears. She had learned long ago that crying only made things worse. Then, Madame Sekou arrived, dressed in her expensive lace gown, shining gold earrings and high heels. She walked in with the grace of a queen. When she saw Zelina standing there, she frowned, her face twisting in disgust. "What are you doing here, you useless girl?" Madame Sekou shouted, loud enough for everyone to hear. The crowd turned to watch, students, teachers, and parents staring in curiosity. Zelina's heart pounded. I came for the event, Auntie," she said softly. Madame Sekou let out a harsh laugh. "The event? With what money? Do you think you belong here with these children?" She grabbed Zelina's arm and yanked her forward. "Look at her, everyone. This girl is nothing but a burden, a useless orphan I was forced to take in. She eats my food, wears my daughter's old clothes, and still dares to show her face here." A wave of gasps spread through the crowd. Some parents looked at each other awkwardly, while some students whispered, enjoying the drama. Adan and her friends laughed even harder. Zelina felt something inside her break. It wasn't just sadness or embarrassment. It was pain deeper than anything she had felt before. She wanted to shout, to tell Madame Sekou that she was not useless, that she was not just an orphan, that she had dreams. But the words refused to come out. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She clenched her fists, staring at the ground as Madame Sekou continued to shame her. "You should be grateful I even let you stay in my house," Madame Sekou continued. "Without me, you'd be sleeping in the streets like a stray dog." More laughter, more whispers. Zelina could feel her chest tightening, her breath shaky. She wanted to run, to hide, but she didn't move. Instead, she swallowed the pain and forced herself to stay strong. Finally, Madame Sekou sighed in irritation. "Get out of my sight. Go home and finish your chores. You are embarrassing me." Zelina turned around slowly and walked away, her heart heavy with sorrow. The laughter of Adan and her friends echoed in her ears as she left the school compound. As she walked home, hot tears finally rolled down her cheeks. But with each tear that fell, something else grew inside her. A quiet fire, a determination that one day, things would change. One day, she would no longer be humiliated. One day, she would prove them all wrong. The night was dark, and thunder rumbled across the sky as heavy raindrops began to fall over Kelema. The wind howled through the narrow streets, rattling windows and doors. Inside Madame Sekou's house, Zelina shivered in the tiny storeroom where she slept on the cold floor. She had just finished a long day of chores, her body aching from exhaustion. But before she could close her eyes, the door suddenly burst open. Madame Sekou stood there, her face twisted in anger. "Get up, you useless girl!" she shouted. Zelina sat up quickly, fear gripping her heart. "Auntie, what did I do?" she asked, her voice trembling. Madame Sekou didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed Zelina by the arm and dragged her out of the room. Adan stood by the doorway, watching with a cruel smile, but she said nothing. Zelina struggled to keep up as Madame Sekou pulled her through the house. The rain was now pouring heavily outside, but Madame Sekou didn't care. She yanked open the front door and, without warning, shoved Zelina out into the storm. Zelina stumbled, falling onto the muddy ground. She looked up at her aunt with wide, teary eyes. "Auntie, please, where will I go?" she cried. Madame Sekou crossed her arms and glared down at her. "I don't care. You are nothing but a burden. I fed you, clothed you, and this is how you repay me, always embarrassing me, always looking so pathetic." Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating Madame Sekou's cold expression. "I should have done this a long time ago," she hissed. "Don't ever come back to my house. You are no longer welcome here." With that, she slammed the door shut, leaving Zelina alone in the storm. For a moment, Zelina sat frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. The rain soaked through her thin dress, and the wind bit into her skin. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stop shivering. She wanted to scream, to beg, to knock on the door again, but she knew it was useless. Madame Nseku had made up her mind. She had been thrown away like trash. Slowly, she stood up, her feet sinking into the muddy ground. She looked around, but there was nowhere to go. The streets were empty, the town silent except for the sound of rain and the distant barking of stray dogs. Tears mixed with raindrops as she took her first step into the unknown. She had no home, no food, and no one to turn to, but she refused to give up. With every step, memories of her parents filled her mind. She remembered their warm hugs, their laughter, the way they had loved her. If they were here, they would have never let this happen, but they were gone. And now, she was truly alone. Zelina wandered through the streets searching for shelter. She passed closed shops, locked houses, and dark alleys. Fear gripped her, but she kept moving. She had survived Madame Nseku's cruelty for years. She would survive this too. Finally, she found an old abandoned market stall with a broken roof. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. She curled up in the corner, hugging her knees to her chest. The rain still poured, but at least she had some cover. As she sat there, exhausted and heartbroken, a single thought kept repeating in her mind. This is not the end. I will not let this be the end. And with that, Zelina closed her eyes, determined to fight for a better tomorrow. The morning after the storm, Zelina woke up in the abandoned market stall, her body stiff from the cold. Her stomach growled loudly, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since the day before. She hugged her knees to her chest, trying to fight back the hopelessness creeping into her heart. But she couldn't give up. She wouldn't. With no home and no one to help her, Zelina had to find a way to survive. She wandered through the streets of Kelema, looking for any small job she could do. She offered to carry goods for market women, sweep shop floors, and even wash dishes at a roadside food stand. Some people took pity on her and gave her a few coins. Others shooed her away like she was a stray animal. Despite the struggles, Zelina worked hard. She used the little money she earned to buy bread and water, just enough to keep herself going. At night, she returned to the market stall, curled up in the corner, and whispered to herself, I will survive. I will make it. Days turned into weeks, and Zelina's life became a routine of hard work and hunger. But no matter how difficult things got, she refused to beg. She refused to steal. She wanted to survive with dignity, no matter what. One day, while sweeping outside a small grocery store, an elderly man watched her with curious eyes. He had a kind face, with grey hair and deep wrinkles that made him look wise. Little girl, he called out, why are you working so hard alone? Zelina looked up, hesitant. She had learned to be careful around strangers. I just need money for food, she answered simply. The man nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. Where do you live? Zelina hesitated, then lowered her gaze. Nowhere. The man sighed and walked closer. What is your name? Zelina. He smiled. I'm Uncle Biko. Then after a pause, he said, come with me. Zelina hesitated again. What if he was like Madame Nseku? What if he just wanted to use her? But something in Uncle Biko's eyes told her he was different. So, cautiously, she followed him. Uncle Biko took her to a small but warm home on the edge of town. It wasn't fancy, but it was filled with books, old furniture, and the smell of freshly cooked food. You can stay here if you are willing to work hard and learn, he said. Zelina couldn't believe her ears. You mean, I can stay? Uncle Biko nodded, but only if you promise me one thing. What? That you will never give up on yourself. Tears welled up in Zelina's eyes. She nodded quickly. I promise. From that day on, Uncle Biko became her guardian, her teacher, and the father figure she never had. He taught her how to read and write better, shared stories of great people who had overcome struggles, and most importantly, reminded her every day that she was worthy. With his help, Zelina returned to school. This time, she wasn't the poor, hopeless girl people mocked. She was determined, hard-working, and ready to prove that no matter where she came from, she had a bright future ahead. And for the first time in a long time, she felt safe, she felt loved, and she knew this was only the beginning of her journey. Zelina's new life with Uncle Biko was nothing like the one she had lived before. For the first time, she had a safe place to sleep, warm meals to eat, and someone who truly cared about her. But most importantly, she had a chance to learn. She threw herself into her studies, determined to make something of herself. Every day, she woke up before sunrise to read, practice writing, and solve difficult math problems. At school, she sat in the front row, listening carefully to every lesson. When other students played after school, she stayed back to study in the classroom or read books in the small library. She refused to let her past define her. Every cruel word Madame Nseku had spoken, every insult Adan had thrown at her, it all became fuel for her fire. "I will prove them wrong," she whispered to herself every night. Her hard work did not go unnoticed. She quickly became the best student in her class, impressing teachers with her intelligence and determination. She won awards, topped every exam, and gained the respect of her classmates. No longer was she the poor orphan girl people pitied. She was the brightest student in Kelema. When she completed secondary school, an opportunity of a lifetime came her way. A prestigious university in Zavunda City was offering scholarships to the top students in the country. Zelina applied, pouring all her effort into the entrance exams and interviews. The day the results were announced, her hands trembled as she opened the letter. And there it was. She had been accepted. Tears of joy streamed down her face as she ran to Uncle Biko, waving the letter in the air. "I did it! I got the scholarship!" she cried. Uncle Biko hugged her tightly. "I always knew you would, my child," he said, his voice filled with pride. Leaving Kelema was bittersweet. It had been the place of her deepest pain, but also where she had found hope. As she boarded the bus to Zavunda City, she promised herself one thing: "I will make the most of this chance." Life in Zavunda City was not easy. The university was filled with students from rich and powerful families, and at times she felt out of place. But she reminded herself why she was there. She studied harder than ever, taking extra classes, working part-time jobs to support herself, and learning everything she could about business and leadership. By the time she graduated, she had built a reputation as one of the most brilliant minds in her field. Instead of working for someone else, she took a bold risk. She started her own business. At first, it was small. She used the little savings she had and worked day and night to grow her company. She faced setbacks, failures, and moments of doubt, but she never gave up. She remembered the hungry nights, the humiliations, the cold streets of Kelema, and pushed herself harder. Years passed, and her business grew beyond what she had ever imagined. She built a successful empire, becoming one of the most influential women in Zavunda City. Newspapers wrote about her. People admired her, and those who once looked down on her now spoke her name with respect. Zelina had done it. She had turned her pain into power, her struggles into success. But deep inside, she knew there was one last thing she needed to do: return to Kelema, the place where her story began. Years had passed since Zelina last set foot in Kelema. The little girl who had been thrown out into the streets on a stormy night was gone. In her place stood a powerful, wealthy woman, one of the most successful business leaders in Zavunda City. She stepped out of her luxury car, dressed in an elegant gown, her confidence shining as bright as the diamond earrings she wore. The streets of Kelema had not changed much, but the people had. As she walked through the marketplace, heads turned. People whispered among themselves, wondering who this rich and beautiful woman was. Nobody recognized her. Nobody knew that this was the same girl who once worked small jobs for scraps of food, the same girl who had slept in an abandoned market stall. Zelina's heart pounded as she approached the place she once called home, Madame Nseku's house. The once grand house now looked old and neglected. The paint had peeled off, the garden was overgrown, and the front door hung loosely on its hinges. The wealth and power Madame Nseku once flaunted were gone. Zelina knocked. After a moment, the door creaked open. Standing there was Madame Nseku, but she no longer looked proud and powerful. Her expensive clothes were gone, replaced by a faded wrapper and an old blouse. Wrinkles lined her face, and her once bright eyes were now filled with worry. For a moment, she stared at Zelina, confused. Then, recognition flashed across her face, followed by shock. "Zelina?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Zelina smiled, but there was no warmth in her expression. "Hello, Madame Nseku. It's been a long time." Madame Nseku's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Before she could speak, another familiar face appeared. Adan. Adan was no longer the spoiled, arrogant girl Zelina remembered. She looked thin, her expensive jewelry and designer clothes gone. Her eyes widened in disbelief as she took in Zelina's appearance. "Zelina?" she gasped. "Is it really you?" Zelina nodded. "Yes, it's me." There was silence. The woman they had once humiliated, mistreated, and thrown away now stood before them, stronger than ever. Tears welled up in Madame Nseku's eyes as she stepped forward. My daughter, please forgive me. Life has been hard, my business failed, and we lost everything. We are struggling to survive. Adan quickly joined in. Yes, Zelina, we were wrong. Please help us. You have so much now and we have nothing. Zelina looked at them, remembering everything. Every insult, every night she had gone to bed hungry, every tear she had shed because of their cruelty. A part of her wanted to feel pity, but another part of her knew that this was justice. Taking a deep breath, she said, now you know how it feels to have nothing. Now you understand the pain of struggling to survive. Madame Nseku fell to her knees. Please, Zelina, we are sorry. Zelina's gaze hardened. When I begged you to let me stay, you threw me into the streets. When I had nothing, you laughed at me. Now you want my help? Adan sobbed. We didn't know life would turn out like this. Zelina shook her head. No, you didn't. But I did, and I fought my way out of the darkness. She turned away, walking back to her car, leaving them to face the consequences of their actions. As she drove away, she felt no sadness, no regret, only strength. She had returned, not for revenge, but to show them that no matter what they had done to her, she had risen above it all. The grand hall in Zavunda city glittered with golden lights. The air buzzed with excitement as the city's richest and most powerful people gathered for the prestigious business gala. Reporters lined the entrance, cameras flashing as luxury cars arrived one by one. Then, a sleek black car pulled up. The driver stepped out and opened the door. A tall, elegant woman in a breathtaking gown stepped onto the red carpet. The crowd gasped, and whispers filled the air. It was Zelina. She walked with confidence, her head held high, her success radiating from every step she took. The once-forgotten orphan of Kalema was now one of the most powerful women in the country. Unbeknownst to her, two familiar figures stood in the crowd, eyes wide in disbelief. Madame Nseku and Adan had sneaked into the event, hoping to find wealthy people to beg for help. Life had been cruel to them after their downfall. The riches they once had were gone, their home lost, and their reputation destroyed. They had spent years struggling, moving from place to place, desperately searching for someone to save them. And now, in front of their eyes, the girl they had once thrown away stood on top of the world. Madame Nseku's hands trembled as she grabbed Adan's arm. It can't be. That's not Zelina, she whispered, but her voice was weak with shock. Adan swallowed hard. It is her, Mama, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Before they could think, Zelina turned slightly, her eyes scanning the crowd. For a brief moment, her gaze locked onto theirs. Time seemed to freeze. Madame Nseku's heart pounded. She had to act fast. If she didn't, this chance might slip away. Forcing a weak smile, she pushed through the crowd towards Zelina, dragging Adan behind her. Zelina! My daughter! Madame Nseku cried, her voice breaking with fake emotion. Oh, thank God we found you! Zelina turned fully toward them, her face calm but unreadable. She did not move, did not speak. She simply watched. Madame Nseku fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. Zelina, please forgive me. I was wrong. I was foolish. I was blinded by my own pride. She sobbed loudly, making sure everyone around could hear her. Adan quickly followed her mother's lead. Zelina, we are suffering. Life has been so hard. We have nothing left. Please, help us. Zelina remained silent, her expression unreadable. The crowd around them began to whisper, confused about what was happening. Reporters had already turned their cameras toward the scene, eager to capture the shocking reunion. Madame Nseku reached for Zelina's hand, but before she could touch her, Zelina stepped back. The rejection was loud and clear. Zelina's voice was calm but firm. You call me your daughter now? Where was that love when you threw me into the streets? Madame Nseku's lips trembled. I made a mistake, Zelina. I was blinded by greed, but I regret everything. Please, have mercy. Zelina's gaze hardened. Did you have mercy on me when I begged you to let me stay? When I had nowhere to go? Did you care? Adan sobbed. We were wrong. We know that now. Zelina let out a soft laugh, but there was no humor in it. Now that you have nothing, you suddenly remember me. She shook her head. No, Madame Nseku. You didn't regret your actions. You regret the consequences. Madame Nseku tried again. Zelina, you have everything now. Helping us wouldn't cost you anything. Zelina's eyes flashed with pain and anger. You're right. I do have everything now. But I got here without your help. I survived without your kindness. I don't owe you anything." With that, she turned away. Madame Nseku and Adan screamed after her, but Zelina didn't look back. As she walked away, the whispers in the crowd grew louder. The truth was out. The world now knew what Madame Nseku had done to the girl who once had nothing. And now it was too late. The room fell silent. Every eye was on Zelina. The whispers in the grand hall grew louder as people tried to understand what was happening. Madame Nseku and Adan were still on their knees, begging, crying, pleading for mercy. But Zelina stood tall, unmoved, her expression cold as stone. She had waited for this moment, not for revenge, but for justice. A reporter rushed forward, microphone in hand. "Miss Zelina, who are these women? Why are they calling you their daughter?" Zelina took a deep breath. The past flashed before her eyes. The nights she had cried herself to sleep. The days she worked under the hot sun for scraps of food. The humiliation, the pain, the loneliness. The world had to know. "These women," she said, her voice clear and strong, "are my aunt and cousin. They are the ones who threw me out onto the streets when I was just a child. When I lost my parents, I thought they would take care of me. Instead, they treated me like a servant, starved me, humiliated me, and finally, abandoned me in the middle of a stormy night." Gasps filled the room. Cameras flashed wildly. People turned to look at Madame Nseku and Adan with disgust. Madame Nseku's face turned pale. "No, she's lying. We loved her like our own," she cried, but her voice shook with fear. Zelina let out a bitter laugh. "Loved me? Is that what you call what you did to me? For years I lived in hunger while you and Adan feasted. I wore rags while Adan wore the finest clothes. I was denied an education while you gave your daughter the best schools. And when you decided you didn't need me anymore, you threw me away like garbage." The crowd murmured in shock. The once respected Madame Nseku was now exposed for the cruel woman she truly was. Adan covered her face in shame. "Zelina, please, don't do this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Zelina took a step closer, her eyes burning with the pain of the past. "Do what, Adan? Tell the truth? Did you ever think about me when you laughed at my pain? When you called me worthless? When you stood by and watched your mother abuse me?" Tears streamed down Adan's face. She had no words. Zelina turned back to the reporters. "These women only seek my help now because they have lost everything. Madame Nseku's business failed, and now she has nothing. They are not sorry for what they did to me. They are only sorry that karma finally caught up with them." Madame Nseku grabbed Zelina's hand desperately. "Please, my child. We are family. If you don't help us, we will starve." Zelina pulled her hand away. Her next words were slow, deliberate, and final. "Did you think of me when I was starving? Did you worry about me when I had nowhere to sleep? Number, you didn't. And now, I give you what you gave me. Nothing." The crowd erupted. Some clapped, others shook their heads at Madame Nseku in disgust. Madame Nseku collapsed to the floor, sobbing. "Please, please, Zelina." Zelina looked down at the woman who had once looked down on her. But there was no pity in her heart. She turned and walked away, leaving them to face the consequences of their cruelty. This was not revenge. This was justice. Madame Nseku and Adan sat on the cold marble floor, their faces stained with tears, their hearts heavy with regret. The once powerful woman who had controlled everything in her life now had nothing. The proud and spoiled girl who had mocked and humiliated others was now just another forgotten soul in a world that no longer cared for her. As Zelina walked away from the grand hall, she felt no anger, no bitterness, only strength. She had spent years fighting, struggling, and rising above every obstacle that life had thrown at her. Now she had everything she once dreamed of: success, respect, and power. But most importantly, she had peace. She did not need revenge. She did not need to see Madame Nseku and Adan suffer. Life had already given them the punishment they deserved. The world now knew the truth. Madame Nseku and Adan had built their lives on cruelty, greed, and selfishness, and in the end, it all came crashing down. Their wealth had disappeared, their reputation was destroyed, and now, the very girl they had once thrown away was the one standing above them. Madame Nseku looked around, hoping someone, anyone, would help her. But all she saw were cold, judging eyes. The same society she had once impressed with her riches now turned its back on her. No one wanted to be associated with a woman who had abandoned an orphan. Adan hugged her knees, crying softly. She had once thought she was better than Zelina. She had laughed at her suffering, mocked her for being poor, and treated her like nothing. But now, Zelina was everything, and she was nothing. Zelina stepped into her car, the doors closing with a soft click. As the driver pulled away from the event, she looked out the window one last time. She saw Madame Naseku and Adan still kneeling, broken and lost, but she felt no sadness. They had made their choice years ago. Zelina had once been weak, helpless, and at the mercy of others, but she had learned that life does not decide your future. You do. Hard work, determination, and resilience had transformed her into the woman she was today. She had survived. She had thrived. And now she had won, not through revenge, but through success. As the car drove toward the bright lights of Zavunda city, Zelina smiled. Her past did not define her. Her pain did not break her. She was living proof that even the darkest past could be turned into a powerful future, and that was the final lesson.